Hello, I'm so glad you're here. This is Jennifer McGuire. Happy New Year. Now, I know I haven't been doing many pre-recorded videos lately, but I promise I'll be getting back into it. I took some time off for various reasons around the holidays. I have been doing lives. If you haven't checked them out, I encourage you to do so. I think a lot of people really like that format because you can ask questions. However, I will continue to do pre-recorded videos like this one, and I will do a mix of both on my channel. I'm easing back into crafting with this video where I share some simple stencil tips, some techniques, just some tips and more. All right, let's get started with this example. I'm actually going to create 2 cards at once, demonstrating the technique of using stencils for resist. This is an excellent way to use different products you have in your craft room for really cool results. I'll be using the new Simon Says Stamp Heart Bloom stencil. I really like the detail of this, and that can be used for a variety of card occasions. Any stencil would work for this technique. Now I'm taping the stencil at the top corner of a piece of white cardstock. You could use whatever method you want. I decided to do this technique over the entire 6x6 stencil so that I can trim a background down and then have the strips left over for another card. Over the stencil, I'm applying Simon Hurley Solar Paste. Solar Paste is an incredible product. It's super smooth, goes on very easily, and lasts quite a while. And these have like a kind of iridescent-y look to it. So when you tilt it in the light, you see different colors show up. There are different colors available. You can put this on dark color cardstock and it shows up even more. But I'm looking for a subtle resist today. So this will look almost white on white. I wish you could see it in real life. The kind of iridescent pearly effect that you get when it dries is beautiful. I'm using my Simon Hurley tool set. This is great for applying an even layer of paste or gel over a stencil. I use this toolkit quite often. You can see the 2 tools that come with it, and it has a great price point. Highly recommend it. So once I have a smooth layer over the stencil, I will remove the stencil and immediately wash it in my sink and then wipe the excess product off of the tools. You want to clean things right away so that this product doesn't dry on them. And the background I will set aside to dry, and we'll come back to it in a moment. After I've cleaned everything off, I thought I'd do another background, this time with Hero Art's white pearl paste. I really like Hero Art's paste also. This pearl is really hard to catch in the camera, but in real life it gives beautiful results. Now for the technique that I'm doing of resist over a stencil, you can use a variety of gels, glitter pastes, anything that you would normally apply over a stencil that gives texture. If you don't have any gels or pastes, you can also lay your stencil down, press embossing ink such as Versamark over the openings, add clear embossing powder and heat set that. And that would also work for this resist technique. Now I chose to use lighter paste here. So we did that kind of iridescent solar paste, and then here we have this pearl paste from Hero Arts because it'll kind of give me a white on white look when I remove the stencil. I wanted something that would stay kind of white, but again, you can use different colors if you prefer. So I set both of those aside to dry, and now I'm going to come back and finish off those backgrounds. We're going to do the resist technique by applying ink over these backgrounds. So my solar paste background is dry now. I wish you could see the pearly kind of holographic look that you get to this. It picks up different colors when you tilt it in the light. I wish the camera showed it. You have to trust me, in real life it's beautiful. Over this, I am applying Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated ink using a large ink blending tool. Now you could really apply a lot of different inks here. Different dye inks, distress inks, you could even use oxide inks and some pigment inks. But what we're doing is applying that ink over our paste. Now the paste is dry, and what's going to happen is the paste will resist the ink we put on top. After I've done the sweets color on one side of my background, I'm applying the twilight color on the other side, and I'm going to almost meet there in the center. Once I'm done with the twilight color, I'll come in with a taffy, which is a darker pinkish purple, and I'll put that in the center, making sure to overlap the inking I've already done. That will give me a better blend. Now, when you're doing resist, I recommend taking a dry cloth and buffing the excess ink off of the areas where we have that dried paste. So you can see my hearts are turning pink there in the center. But once I come in with a dry cloth, it goes back to its original color. So you really want to buff off that excess ink. And you can see my hearts have stayed true to that solar paste color that has its white with a little bit of blue and pink tint to it. It is so beautiful in real life. And the resist technique is a great way to use your gels, your embossing powders, your pastes, your stencils, and your colorful inks together. I'm going to set that one aside and finish the other background. This is the one where we use the Hero Arts Pearl paste on white cardstock. I'm going to do an ombre inking over it. And I'll be using some new colors from Simon Says Stamp. This is Dew, Mist, and Raindrop. Now this is all dry. I wish you could see the pearly shine. It is one of my favorite pastes out there. I'm going to do that ombre, going light on one end to dark on the other. You could use one ink to do this, just putting a light application on one end and going heavier towards the other. But I have multiple ink colors here, so I might as well put them to use. Notice that I stop every once in a while to buff away that excess ink that rests on top of the dried paste, giving us that fun resist look. Now you could have done the ink blending and then put the paste on top. But sometimes when you do that, the paste kind of grabs some of that color and absorbs it, and it changes a bit. So by doing the resist, you get a different look. You get that nice kind of bright white with the color around it. I encourage you to experiment with this, maybe using clear glitter pastes or different gels or embossing powders you have. Resist is a really fun technique to do and always gives beautiful results. I will link up here on the top right and in my description below to another resist video if you're looking for more ideas. So again, you could use various gels, pastes, and embossing powders to create the image, and then you can use various inks on top for the resist. I use Simon Says Stamp saturated ink because it has beautiful colors, but you could use various dye inks that you may have on hand. All right, let's finish off both of these backgrounds creating two cards. I wanted to show off a lot of the background, so I'm putting just a simple sentiment in the center. I have the Simon Says Stamp Hugs and Kisses die set on the left and the I Think the World of You die set on the right. I like die sets like this because they can be the focal point of your card on a fun inky background. I wanted the word die cuts to match my background, and I didn't want to dig through all of my cardstock to find just the right match. So instead I have a piece of scrap white cardstock, and I'm pressing one of the inks I used on my background directly onto the cardstock. I wasn't sure if I wanted to use a lighter or darker, so I'm trying both here, and then I'll decide to go with the lighter version. Now I'll take the word die and cut from that inked cardstock, and I know my word die cut will perfectly match the background. I often will ink up both sides of the cardstock to try out different options. In this case, I had inked one side with the taffy and one side with the twilight, and I couldn't decide what color I wanted to go with. I ended up liking the look of the twilight better, so I inked up another piece and die cut from that to use on my card. Sometimes you just got to try things out to figure out what will work best in the end. So now I'm gluing together all of these pieces. I'm using Gina K Connect in my fine tip bottle, and I'm gluing onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. By the way, I did trim that background down to be about 4 by 5 1/4 inches, and I saved the strips that I cut off to create another card in the future. Now I'm gluing layers together because I love the look of dimension, of layered die cuts, but you definitely could skip it if you want to. You'll notice that the bottom layers of my stacked die cuts usually have inking or stamping on them. They're mess up pieces that I don't want to go to waste. Now I have die cut 2 of the word dies from white cardstock, and then on top I'll glue the inked die cut. So this will have lots of dimension. You definitely could skip some of those layers if you wanted to. Now I'm going to glue that right onto the center of our background, and I like that so much of that stenciled background still shows. Now for our pink card, I'll use the Hugs and Kisses message. At this point, I still am not sure if I want to use the taffy inked die cut or the twilight inked die cut. So I have both here. After playing around, I went with the twilight, but I'll save that other pink die cut for a future card. I wanted a pink heart on the Hugs and Kisses card, so I got a piece of Altenew Moonstone glitter paper, which is like a white glitter paper. It is beautiful. It comes in the Milky Way glitter pack. And I colored it with a Copic marker. You could use any alcohol marker for this, like an Olo marker, Copic, or even a Sharpie. You can also color your glitter paper with alcohol inks. That way my pink glitter heart matches my pink background. On the other card, I went with the Altenew Diamond Glitter cardstock for my little die cut heart. That's kind of a soft champagne glitter that really works on any style of card. Now, all these little hearts I cut with the Simon Says Stamp Party Hearts die, which is one that I use very often in videos. It cuts a bunch of hearts of different sizes. And I keep all my extras in that little yellow bowl that you see at the top there, and it's right in the drawer next to where I create because I reach in there quite often. I also wanted to add a sentiment strip along the pink card right below the Hugs and Kisses. For this, I'm using pre-printed sentiment strips from Simon Says Stamp. I really like this new Bestie version that has a lot of creative sentiments. Now, the way I cut sentiment strips from this is I use a large Post-it note. I'll link to those Post-it notes below, but you could use a smaller one if you prefer. I line it up right below the sentiment that I want to cut, and then I place this into my trimmer. You could use any trimmer for this. I put the edge of the Post-it note right along the cutting edge of my trimmer, and then I cut along that. That way I'm sure I'm cutting right below my sentiment strip. All right, now I can take this other piece, save it for later. Then I will take the Post-it note and put it above the sentiment that I want, just lining it up where I would like it to cut. Then I'll place that back into my trimmer, lining up the edge of that Post-it note with the edge of my cutting area there, so right where it's going to cut. I'll drop the blade, and look at that. I have a perfectly positioned, centered along that strip sentiment. Now I can just cut the little bits off the end, and I'll save that Post-it note and use it many, many times. Now I've grabbed a piece of scrap cardstock here and cut very thin strips, and I'm gluing 4 of those on the back of the sentiment strip. This will give it nice, strong dimension. Again, you can skip that if you want to. This is a great way to use up even the thinnest of scraps. So this pink card is complete now. You can see, if you look carefully, that kind of iridescent-y, holographic, pearly shine that the solar paste gives. And remember that solar paste looked almost white, but if you put it on black cardstock, it would give a completely different look. Here I just wanted to use it for a colorful resist technique. On the other card, I really wanted my letters to stand out a bit more, so I'm applying a thin layer of glossy accents onto the inked letters. This will give it nice dimension, almost gives it kind of a domed look with dimension and shine. I often forget to use glossy accents, but they always make a card stand out even more. So after giving that some time to dry, here is the completed card. I really like those pearly hearts in the background with the bold color around it. I hope that these 2 cards inspire you to use your stencils for a resist technique. Again, you could use any pastes, gels, or embossing over the stencil. Then once that's dried, you can apply a great variety of inks on top for that bold resist color. So now let's move on to a completely different technique that you can do with stencils. I'm sorry these are 3 kind of random ideas today with stencils, but I'm just trying to get back into creating, and sometimes you just got to dip your toe into it. All right, for my next example, I'll show how you can use a simple masking technique to really step up your layering stencils. I'll be using the new Simon Says Stamp Heart Banner Stencil Set. There are 4 stencils. You could use these separately and just have hearts randomly on a background, but together it creates a really fun heart banner background. I have the first stencil that I'm taping onto white cardstock, and I have my Simon Says Stamp A2 placement guides. These are very thick and great for masking as you do inking over stencils. Now I've got the white one here. You could use scrap paper if you prefer, but this is nice because I can easily wipe it off. I have my first color of ink. You could use any inks for this. And I'm placing that placement guide, the edge of the placement guide, right down the center of a heart opening and inking up only half of the heart. This is a lighter pink color. I'll later come back and do the other half with a darker pink color. So now I'll move my placement guide to the next spot, lining up the edge of the placement guide right down the center of another heart. So what's happening here is I will be able to put 2 colors in each heart opening. This took me about 20 minutes to make this background, but I really like the results. So you may have a stencil that has like a fun pattern to it, like a geometric pattern. Try using a straight edge, like I have here, to ink up half of the opening with one color and half with another color. This allows you to get more color over your stencil and really step it up. You could even do a really kind of funky look by taking a large layering flower, inking half of the flower up with one color family and the other half with another color family, and get a really unique look. So now here I have done some of the hearts with a light pink on one half, and on the other half of those hearts I'm doing a darker pink. This is Peony, which is a beautiful bright pink color. You could use any inking tools and any ink for this. Distress inks with the foamed ink applicator would be a great option too. Okay, so I did some of the hearts here with the two-tone pink. I'm going to clean the stencil off with a little bit of rubbing alcohol and then line that same stencil back up and do the rest of the hearts. This is another way to get more out of your stencils. Make the different openings different colors instead of doing one color over the entire stencil. I just use a wet cloth to clean off that placement guide, but if you have a scrap paper, you might want to switch to another piece so you don't transfer ink. That's why having a reusable guide like this to do masking is very helpful. So now I'll do the rest of the hearts with a light blue on one half and a dark blue on the other half, using the edge of the placement guide to do that bit of masking. It was at this point I thought of an easier way to do this. When I'm doing something like this that takes a bit of time, I like to think if there is another way to do the technique, maybe a different result would be achieved by that other way, or a faster way. And when I was doing this, I thought of a faster way. Instead of doing one half light blue and then the other half dark blue, I could instead start by doing the whole heart light, not having to mask, and then come in with the mask with the darker color. So I'm going to do that with the next set of hearts. So off screen, I moved on to the next layering stencil in the set, and I did the two-tone yellow on some of the hearts. Now I'm moving on to green for the rest of the hearts, and I'm using the Limalicious color, which is a lighter green, and covering the entire heart with that green. It's much faster to cover the entire heart than it is to mask the half off. So after I've done the lighter color over all the heart openings, I will come in with my mask and a darker color and ink up half of it. Now I continue to do this over the other two stencils. If you want to save time, you definitely could use the 4 stencils and just apply one color over the entire stencil. But by doing this technique and by doing different hearts on one stencil, different colors, I was able to end up with lots of different color hearts on the background, and I really liked the result. And this really is a good reminder to use your products how you're most comfortable. If you prefer to use the 4 stencils with 4 different colors for easy, quick application, that is definitely okay. That's really how they're meant to be used. If you like to add these extra steps in for a different result, then do that. Do whatever you enjoy. For me, I like to step things up. And check out this fun, bold, colorful background. To make the card even more fun, I thought I'd turn it into a shaker card, but this card is bigger than most. I'm using my new Waffle Flower A6 rectangle frame dies. I really like their rectangle frame dies. They have them in A2, A6, and 5x7. Now A6 is fun because it's a little bit bigger than A2. The note card size would be 6.5 by 4.5 inches. I'm using the largest frame here. You can see I've already die cut a bunch of these frames and have them ready to go on hand. I took out 4 white die cuts using the largest frame, and then I also used the Altenew Diamond Glitter cardstock to make one large frame. I'm going to glue all these together to make the walls of my shaker card. Now, you could use foam tape for this if you prefer, but I like to do that nice strong dimension that you get with layered cardstock. Totally up to you. So here I'm gluing together 4 white frame die cuts. Again, the outside measurement of these is 6.5 by 4.5 inches. Now I could put this in either an A6 envelope or a 5x7 envelope. I really like that larger size. The shipping costs are the same as with a regular A2 card. I think it's a fun, different option to play with, and I'll link to my sources for those envelopes below. Now I'm going to take this stacked frame and glue it right onto our background, kind of centering it up where I want it. Once that's dry, I can trim off the excess and save those scraps for another card. Now it's time to add a sentiment, and I've got a fun way to kind of step up your shaker card by doing this. I use the Concord and 9th Pop Heart die set to cut big hugs from a piece of scrap paper that I've trimmed down. I've been using some temporary tape to tape that scrap paper, that negative space, right in the top center of my shaker window opening. This way I can place my letter die cuts in just the right positioning, and I don't have to fuss with it at all. I'm using the negative space as a guide. I die cut the word Big Hugs 5 times from black cardstock, and I'm going to stack those letter die cuts together. Here I'm putting glue on the top of 4 of the H's. Then I take the unglued piece and just pick up the others with it, and then use my fingers to press the letters together, lining them up. That's a really fast way to stack die cuts. If you do not want to stack die cuts here, you could definitely use foam tape behind one die cut. Totally up to you. And then I'll glue that letter into the opening of the negative space and then put something heavy on top of it. And I'll repeat this for the other layers. So once again, I have 5 die cut letters here that I'm going to glue together. Now, it's up to you how you stack these die cuts together. You can really get fast at it. Another way to do so is to use a pickup tool to pick up each of the die cuts and stack them together, then use your fingers to press them in place, lining them up. And yet another way to stack die cuts is to use your tweezers. This is helpful to some. I encourage you to try the different methods and figure out what is best for you. So after I have put the 5 stacked die cuts together right into the openings, I will give that some time to dry. Again, you could have used foam tape, which would definitely save you some time. Now, while that dries, I'll use my favorite Spellbinders shears to trim off the excess around the edges. Then I will use a paper sander to smooth the edges. I like the sides of my shaker card to be very smooth, and the paper sander is an inexpensive tool that I use a lot in my craft room. Now that my letters are dry, I can carefully remove that blue negative space piece from around the letters. Before adding my shaker bits, I do like to use an anti-static powder tool around all of the edges of these stacked die cuts to make sure that no adhesive is exposed. I don't want it to grab a hold of the little shaker bits I put inside. Next, I'm putting double-sided adhesive tape around the edges, right on top of our frame. This is 1/8" tape. You want to make sure it's something that will seal it nicely, and tape does the trick. Once I have applied that to the top of the frame all the way around, I will add my shaker bits on the inside. I'm using a variety of shaker bits that I have on hand, some iridescent sequins, some clear sequins, some iridescent stars, some glitter discs, and more. You really can put anything you want in here. I went mostly for clear and shiny so that I didn't hide my hearts too much. I made sure to put some of the shaker bits towards the bottom and some towards the top so that there really is a lot moving around on the background. Next, I have a piece of acetate here. This is recycled packaging, but you could also use purchased acetate. Anything clear would work. On the back of the glitter frame die cut that I created earlier, I'm putting double-sided tape, and then I'll place that onto the acetate, trimming off the excess around the edges. After I've trimmed that down, it's time to put our shaker window together. I'll take the release paper off of that double-sided adhesive that's on the top of our shaker window frame. I'll put my frame right into the corner of my Misty stamping tool. This will help me line it up. I'm going to put a little bit of strong liquid adhesive right on top of my letters. This will help to seal off these letters with the shaker window. I'll explain that in a moment. Then I can put my acetate window right in the corner of my Misty stamping tool also and press it down, and that way I can be sure the sides line up. I have a piece of black cardstock here and a piece of Altenew double-sided adhesive sheet. I'm trimming the adhesive sheet down and placing it on the back of the black cardstock. I'll again use the Big Hug die to cut this, and when I cut this, the adhesive will be on the back, so I'm basically creating stickers for the letters Big Hugs. These will get glued on top of the acetate. So let me explain. The reason I did those stacked black die cuts behind the acetate is because it gives some stability to that window. I don't want this to get crushed in the mail. So having those stacked die cuts behind the window really gives it some support there at the center. You could also have used foam tape if you wanted to save time. And here you can see how all of those shaker bits move around freely and they don't all fall to the bottom, which I really like. Now it's time to create a note card. I'm scoring a piece of regular cardstock here, 8.5 by 11, right down the center at 5.5 inches. Then I'm going to trim this down. I decided to make this slightly bigger than our A6 shaker window frame. Now I'll need a bigger envelope because of that. I'll talk about that in a moment, but I really liked that little bit of trim showing around the edge. I did decide to make that black. Now there are a few ways I could change that white note card to black. I could have just rubbed black ink around the outside edge of the front of the card, but instead I cut a piece of black cardstock to the same size as our note card. Because that whole center area would be covered, I die cut big hugs from that, and I'm keeping those letters for another card. No one's ever going to see that you used some of that cardstock in the center, and it really kind of keeps it from going to waste. Now I'm putting glue around the edge of this and gluing it to the front of our note card. Now there are a million ways I could have put this card together, but these are the ways that came to me as I was creating. But really I just wanted to demonstrate that you could make a card of any size. All right, so now we can glue our shaker window on the front of this. And we have our completed card. So this card is about 6 3/4 by 4 3/4 inches. So I'm putting it in a 5 by 7 envelope. Now this one has some bulk to it, so I'll have to put on some extra postage. But that would have been regardless if I made it a smaller card. It's not because it's a bigger card, it's because of thickness that I'll have to add extra postage. Now here's a closer look. You can see our fun stenciled background. I really liked how I was able to add more colors to it by selectively inking and masking over the layering stencils. All right, I have one more card for you, and this isn't really a stencil technique, but rather a tip. It's something that I do off screen and have shown in classes, but I'm not sure I've shown in a video, and that is to number your layering stencils. But I number mine in a special way. But before we do the stenciling, I need to create those two houses using a layering stamp set. This is the Simon Says Stamp European Street Building Stamp Set and Coordinating Dies. They also have a small add-on stamp set and coordinating dies. These are so much fun to stamp. I'm using them in a pretty basic way today, but there are so many ways you can create little scenes with these sets. And with this stamping, I thought I'd share a tip with you about lining up your layering sets. So I have my Misty stamping tool, and inside of it, I have my Waffle flower grip mat, which kind of holds the cardstock in place as I stamp. I'm stamping the first layer of each of my houses. You'll notice that I have to stamp a few times because a couple of these ink pads need re-inking. I need to remember to do that. I'm doing 3 different houses here. I'm not sure how many I'm going to end up using on the card, but I might as well do 3 because I can always save the third for another card or for the inside of my card. After I've stamped the first layer of the houses, it's time to line up the second layer. I like to test my layer stamping before I stamp on my project, so I'll demonstrate that here. Let's start with the greenhouse. I'll take the second image for the greenhouse. I just follow the code that is on the packaging, and I need to line it up over it. Now this lines up on the outside edge. I did the best I could by looking through the stamp, but I want to test it before I stamp it. So what I do is I put my cardstock back in the corner of my stamping tool, and I take that placement guide that I showed you earlier. This is the clear one. The white and the clear come together. I put the clear one over my project and I stamp onto the clear one. And I can look through that and see if I've lined it up okay. And it turns out I did, so I can just wipe that placement guide clean and use it over and over again. Again, those guides are thick and durable, so I could use them for many, many times. So now I can stamp on my project and be sure that it is lined up. Nothing's worse than not lining it up good and wanting to start over. Let's move on to the third layer of this house. I'll do the exact same thing. I'll line it up with my stamped image. Then I'll put that clear placement guide on top. You could also use a piece of clear packaging that you may have, and I'll stamp onto it. Now this time when I stamped, I was checking to make sure it lined up, but also checking the color. I decided this grass green was a little too bright, so I'm stamping with a different color. This is cabbage green. I'm stamping that on top, and I like the result of that better. So by stamping first onto a piece of clear packaging or placement guide, you can test your alignment and you can test your color. So once I have all of these stamped, just stamping the layers, I'll use the coordinating die to cut them out. The stamp set also has other things you can add like flowers, ivy, gates, and more. I just kept them pretty simple. And here I'll show you the other colors that I used to create the other houses. Okay, now time for the stenciling. This is where I'll share my stencil numbering tip. I'm using the new Simon Says Stamp Just My Type Friend Layering Stencil Set. I love this set. It creates multicolored hello friend and thank you. You could do bold, fun colors over this, but I'm going to go for an ombre look. There are also coordinating dies available to cut these out. Now, what I like to do when I get a layering stencil set is number them right away in whatever number that it tells you on the packaging, or sometimes the numbers are etched on the stencil, but I find those are hard to see. So I do a number on the top corner of the stencils using a black Sharpie. I then put a piece of clear Scotch tape on top of those numbers. The reason I do that is I clean ink off my stencils using a spray bottle of rubbing alcohol, and then I wipe it with a dry cloth. If I didn't cover these permanent little numbers that I did, the rubbing alcohol would just take it right off. So by putting tape on top, I'm protecting it. So numbering my stencils allows me to quickly use them and know what order to go in. But it also quickly shows me which side of the stencil is up, because I can look at those numbers. So I'm going to start with stencil number 1, and you can see I've already inked these and I didn't clean them from last time. I actually created this whole thing and then I messed it up by accident, so I'm starting over. I'm starting with stencil number 1 and putting a light green, this is Limelicious, and I'll move on to stencil number 2. Over this I'll put a slightly darker green, which is the Perfection. Again, I'm going for an ombre look here. You could instead do like bold color. You could even mask each letter to be a different color, so you would have something really multicolored, almost looking kind of stained glass. But I wanted something subtle to go along with those little stamped houses we made. All right, so that was stencil number 2. Now stencil number 3. Each time I'm just lining the corner of the stencil with the corner of my cardstock. These stencils do, however, have little dots in the corner that will help you for lining up if you prefer that method. Now for this third stencil, I'm using a field color, but I'm not putting a heavy amount down. That's why you saw me put some of the excess ink off on the side of the stencil. So I'm only using a light amount of that field color. Now I'm moving on to stencil number 4, and I'm using the same field color, but a heavy amount. That way I kind of get a lighter and darker of this color, and it just allows me to stretch my inks. So I used 3 ink pads, but it looks like I used 4. You could also use maybe 2 ink pads here, doing light and dark application of the 2, but I had the 3 pads, so that's what I used. So now we have this great ombre look. All right, so now it's time to use the coordinating dies to cut these out, and I'll use one of the sentiments on this card and another later on. Before I put my card together, I wanted to add a little interest to the white note card background. I cut the new Simon Says Stamp Whirl Diamond Plate die from white cardstock, and I'm gluing it onto a white note card. So this is just a little bit of tone-on-tone interest and texture. This card size is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. Now for the Hello Friend, I did die cut 1 extra die cut and glued it to the back so it's strong. And then I put foam squares on the back of that so that I could tuck the houses behind the hello. So by doubling up the Hello Friend, I can be sure that it'll stay strong and not get crushed in the mail, even though I do have little foam squares behind it. It just makes it stronger. So after I added my 2 little houses coming out from the word hello, I can add some little houses, street lights, and bike that I created with the add-on stamp set. I also use my Copic markers, you could use any marker here, to add little flowers to the window boxes for a pop of color. It really didn't take much effort to do this, just tiny little dots, but it worked out just fine. And I used a fine tip black Sharpie to create little birds in the sky. I felt those little black birds kind of balanced the black that I have in my little street lamp and bike. So here is the completed card. I made sure that the green in the Hello Friend matched the green trees to kind of pull it all together. I didn't end up using the greenhouse. I could save that for another project, or I might glue it to the inside corner of my card. That's always fun to do too. So that's what I have for you today. Just some stencil ideas as I ease myself back into creating. I hope these inspired you. And you can do all of these tips and techniques with stencils you likely already have on hand. If you're interested in what I use today, I do have them linked below in my YouTube description, along with the videos that I mentioned. Also at the end here, I'll link to a couple other videos that are kind of similar techniques if you're looking for more ideas. Thanks for spending this time with me. Happy New Year, and I'll see you soon.